Hi. No, I can't talk to Lady Catherine right now. No, I can't meet the Dashwoods either. Look, I've got to go. I'm in the middle of something. Bye for now.
Everybody wants a piece of the action.
Hi, welcome to my mega video. I made the schoolboy error of recording footage here at Steventon, Jane Austen's birthplace, and I forgot to put the microphone on. So please bear with me as I do this voiceover, because it only lasts for 3 or 4 minutes max. I've got to talk about the village, and I've got to talk about Steventon Court, where she lived for 25 years, and also St. Nicholas Church. So let me give you a little overview here, just as I'm whittling away on the screen, but I didn't know I had no microphone. So Steventon is a peaceful village in Hampshire, just outside Basingstoke, and Jane was born here on the 16th of December 1775. And she lived in Steventon for the first 25 years of her life. The Austen family home, a rectory near St. Nicholas Church, no longer exists. You can see me standing outside here. It was demolished in 1824. But we can still see, we can still walk around the land where the house once stood. I'll overlay an image of the house. Now, if you've seen any videos on YouTube where people have said you can see the old well, you can see here that they've actually started building a brick well around the original well that provided the water for Steventon Court. Now, her father, Reverend George Austen, was the rector here and supplemented his income by taking in pupils, a kind of gentleman's boarding school. Jane would have grown up surrounded by not just her family, but also by the energy of curious, mischievous young boys. Now, the rectory was a modest but lively home with a library of over 500 books, usually rich for a country clergyman, and the literary access shaped Jane from the start. Now, it is known that she started writing when she was about 12 years old, while she lived here at Steventon Court. So Jane's father was actually given the role of rector from his cousin, Thomas Knight, who owned all the land. So it was kind of like a position of clergy offered to him. And with that came 200 acres of land, which he also managed an income from that land because of the tenancies. So not necessarily a gentrified gentleman, shall we say? Anyway, and by the by. Across the way, after the rectory was demolished, Jane's brother Edward Austen-Knight inherited the land and built a new rectory. And it stands on the other side of the road from where the old Steventon rectory stood. And it was likely the home of Jane's clergyman brothers, James and Henry, when they served in Steventon after George Austen retired. Even after Jane left, the Austen legacy remained woven into the fabric of this place. So now I'm going to take you up to St. Nicholas's Church. I do wish I'd put the audio on, but do stick with me. I know it's a long video, but it's going to be fascinating. So the church was the spiritual and social hub of Jane's world. George Austen preached here for over 40 years, and Jane herself would have attended every Sunday. The interior retains many features she would have known. In the grounds are also buried her 2 brothers. Consider how the parish life and the Anglican Church subtly influenced Austen's themes: morality, duty, and quiet tension of English country society. So as we walk into the church, you can see it still looks, you've got all these old pews and you've got all that mosaic on the walls and everything. And this is the pulpit we're going up, where George would have preached to the congregation, as I said, for 40 years. And I'm speculating here, where would the Austen family have sat? Would we have had Jane in the front seat there? Yeah, it's also fascinating. It was a really lovely experience just walking around the church. Here I came outside and I thought I would find both graves, but I could only find the grave of James Austen. Not sure where the other one was. I did have a look, I do promise you. So that was Steventon, and it was also St. Nicholas's Church. So anyway, the sound comes back now, so sit back, get yourself a coffee or a tea, and yeah, just take it all in. I'm now in a little village of Ashe. There's a parish church just up there, lots of these lovely brick walls. But I want to show you this house, because this is the house of Reverend Lefroy and his wife. So it's the winter of 1795-96, and 20-year-old Jane has a flirtatious relationship with Tom Lefroy, who was an Irish student visiting his aunt and uncle here in Ashe. The Lefroys were family friends, being the Reverend George Lefroy. He was rector of Ashe and just a short walk from Steventon. Jane wrote teasingly to Cassandra, "I'm almost afraid to tell you how my Irish friend and I behaved. Imagine to yourself everything most profligate and shocking in a way of dancing and sitting together. They had balls and everything here." Was it serious? Perhaps, but Tom was sent away swiftly, likely because he needed to marry for money and Jane had none. And there were also concerns that the Lefroy family considered the match with the daughter of a country clergyman to be socially beneath them. So yeah, Tom Lefroy and his aunts and uncle lived here. Now, it was later suggested, and I read this somewhere, that the characters of Jane and Tom Lefroy mirrored the characters of Darcy and Elizabeth, but flip it the other way round, in as much as Jane based Darcy on her character and based Elizabeth on Tom Lefroy's character. It's an interesting thing, isn't it, that, you know, all of these interspersions of the things that, you know, go on in her life creep into the novels. It's lovely. Can't be confirmed. I read it somewhere, I'm not sure, but it makes sense. So yeah, that's where the Reverend Tom Lefroy lived, and Jane would have come here to attend, I'm not going to say assemblies, but apparently it was written that they had balls and things here. Whether it's big enough to have a ball, I'm not sure. But it's a lovely home, isn't it? Looks like Bingley's Netherfield. I love it. We're going to see so much, aren't we, on this little trip pertaining to Jane Austen. And so I find myself in Bath, in Somerset. Now Bath, and I'm pronouncing it Bath as opposed to Bath, could be Bath, couldn't it, if you're from up north like me. Now, Jane had two periods of significance here. One was that she visited, and one was that she lived. And when she visited, she stayed at 13 Queen Square. Now this is Queen Square, and it just looks enchanting. It's so Georgian. In the summer of 1799, Jane's first visit to Bath, she and her mother stayed here for a month. Jane was 23 years old then, and she stayed with her mother at number 13 Queen Square, which is just on the corner down there, so we'll go and have a look at that in a minute. But the city was new to her. It was bustling, genteel, full of carriages and gossip, and everything important in the art of being seen. But this was before Bath became her home, and so it lost its charm and novelty when she lived here. She was 23 when she arrived here in 1799, and she wrote to Cassandra, "I really believe I shall always be talking of Bath when I'm home again. I do like it so very much." Oh, who can ever tire of Bath? Now, her enthusiasm would later sour, an arc that mirrors the evolving tone and her writings about the city. So Queen Square, let's go and have a quick look at number 13. So Queen Square, just at the corner of the park here, where Jane would have obviously been walking and, you know, taking a turn. It's currently being renovated, number 13, but there it stands, not a home, but where she stayed when she visited with her mother. So what we need to do now is find the houses that she lived in while she was resident of Bath. So let's go and find a few places. The Austen family moved here shortly after her father George's retirement, so Jane was 25 and she had just experienced her first engagement briefly to Harris Bigwither, which she broke off. It was Jane's one and only engagement. It's amazing. And it lasted less than 24 hours. And it was a moment of societal pressure followed by a bold decision to remain true to herself. In December 1802, Jane and Cassandra were visiting family friends, the Big Sisters, that's big with 2 G's, at Manydown Park in Hampshire. And during their stay, Harris Bigwither, the younger brother of their friends, proposed to Jane. And the exact reason behind her reversals was never recorded in her words, but we can make a few educated guesses. Perhaps it was emotional honesty. Jane famously believed in marrying for love, not money, and while Harris had wealth and security to offer, he may not have had what she truly wanted, intellectual connection or romantic feeling. Or maybe it was obviously a character mismatch. Descriptions of Harris Bigwither suggest that he was awkward, perhaps even overbearing. One later commentator called him a large, plain, awkward sort of man. And finally, it could have been about creative independence. And she married. It's unlikely that she would have had time, space, or freedom to write. So saying no may have also been saying yes to her art. So Jane was 27, Harris was just 21, socially awkward, but the heir to a large estate and a very advantageous match by Regency standards, right? That night, Jane said yes, but by the morning she changed her mind and retracted her acceptance. She and Cassandra abruptly left the next day, cutting short their visit, and Jane was reportedly quite distressed. Anyway, back to 4 Sydney Place. It's a smart Georgian townhouse opposite Sydney Gardens. There's actually a museum here, and it's the oldest public pleasure gardens in England. And Jane was known to attend concerts and stroll through Sydney Gardens, which has got grottos and swings and even a canal with decorative bridges. So these outings likely influenced the social settings in her novels. And although she wrote very little in Bath, this period helped her hone her observation skills. Some scholars suggest Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, both of which feature prominently in Bath, contain thinly veiled critiques of the city's social scene, possibly reflecting her own ambivalence. But they stayed at number 4. I almost want to guess what room was hers. Top room, overlooking the park. Fabulous. Let's go find another location. Behind me are the very fashionable Georgian houses of Green Park. This was Jane Austen's home from 1804 to 1805, and they lived in these newer buildings. I'm not quite sure what one. After 3 years at Sydney Place and before Gay Street, the Austens moved here to what was then the newly built Green Park buildings. But their stay here was brief. Bath's sheen was starting to fade, and this was a transitional phase for Jane. Jane's letters mention the move without enthusiasm because, of course, her father died. But there is a literary connection. Northanger Abbey and Persuasion both mention the area around Green Park. In Persuasion, Anne Elliot walks through the park. This residence could be linked to Austen's ability to weave actual geographical locations into her fiction with uncanny precision, something her contemporary readers loved. But of course this is where George Austen dies, so things are really taking a turn now for the Austen girls, and I'm talking the mother and the two sisters. So they have to leave Green Park. So in 1805, the Reverend George Austen dies, and this leaves the Austen women in a precarious situation, financial dire straits. Remembering that all the brothers have all gone off and done all their, profitable things, whether they've become members of the clergy or joined the Navy or, in Henry's case, become a banker. Jane and Cassandra lived with their mother and father, retiring here to Bath. Now, I'm not sure what the significance of St. Swithin's Church is, other than perhaps it was in the local parish. But the Reverend George Austen is actually buried here. Noisy truck. You can hardly see it. It says, under this stone, something or other remains of the Reverend George Austen, and I can't read the rest. Maybe it says it on here. Rector of Steventon, Hampshire, married Cassandra Lee, which we know. Seventh child was the novelist Jane Austen, which we know. Lists all the novels. His tombstone was removed to the present site in 1968. In 2000 it was remounted on this plaque erected. He's buried in the crypt of the built church of St. Swithin's. He was. The tombstone was removed and here. So he's actually inside in a crypt. So with the Reverend George Austen passing away, it left the ladies in financial dire straits. They actually had to move house 3 or 4 times. And every time that they moved, they dipped more and more into their finances. Obviously, they were seeking assistance from friends and family. So, the locations that I'm going to show you will reflect the status as each time they moved. The house gets less and less grand. And I'm saying that because I'm thinking I'm filming this before I film all the other houses. Now, Jane's time in Bath was not a productive time for her. So in fact, she did no writing, and I think it reflected her disappointment with Bath, but equally the fact that her father died. Had he not passed away, perhaps they would have settled and things would have been fine. But because he died, the finances got worse and worse and worse. It got to the point that, when they were leaving number 7 Trim Street, which was perhaps their worst lodgings, and Edward had secured them Chawton Cottage, which I think something about the ladies of his family not wanting Edward to give them Chawton House. It has a ring, doesn't it, of one of Jane Austen's novels? Am I thinking? See, I only really know Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice. I've seen the other ones, maybe fleetingly. Sense and Sensibility, isn't it? Where the son is being encouraged by the wife to decrease the amount of allowance that he's going to give to his sisters. That's what's kind of happening here. So Edward Austen-Knight is being discouraged from allowing his mother and his two sisters to stay at Chawton Cottage. And I think this is it's all those things that happen in Jane Austen's life that then creep into her stories. So as we saw back at St Swithin's Church, in 1805 everything changed. With the sudden passing of Jane's father, the women found themselves financially shaken. And so they moved here to 25 Gay Street, which was a rented property. This home reflects their increasingly precarious social status. Jane was in her early 30s, unpublished and uncertain about her future. But despite the setbacks, Austen never abandoned writing. Though not prolific in Bath, the life experiences here fed her work later. Now here's a fun fact. It's just a few doors down from the current Jane Austen Centre. Number 7, Trim Street, January to July 1806. Jane and her mother and Cassandra lodged here after giving up the Gay Street house. Now it's a modest building, and it was the Austen family's final residence in Bath. And she stayed here for only 6 months. After this, she left Bath behind, and Jane would never live here again. Now they left the city for good to stay with Jane's brother in Clifton, and then they moved to Southampton, a location I will be taking you to. This is then the exit point for Jane Austen in Bath, because it didn't yield the happiness and literary success that she was hoping for, but her more prolific and happy writing years would come after Bath when she moved to Chawton. But it's not the exit point for us. We've got one more location to visit, just down here, if they will let me in. Let's go and see. Now then, I'm going to go into the visitor centre, the Jane Austen Centre. I'm going to film with my GoPro, very discreet, rather than walking around with the tripod and the mounting and everything. All I need to do is just, because there's a microphone on this, I can just talk with that and hold it. The audio won't be quite as good as it's been on here, but I can tweak that in post-production. So just drop this stuff off to my car, which is conveniently parked there, and then we'll go into the visitor centre. It's a goer. They said yes, so I've got my ticket, 12 o'clock showing. I'm not allowed to film the general public, which is fine because I don't want to do that anyway. They're not that interesting. But we can walk around the exhibition. I'm not allowed to film the intro to the exhibition where the characters are all in costume and stuff, but after that I'm free to walk around at my leisure, so let's do it.
Me too. I bet. Yeah. You need some sleep.
We will do the gift shop coming out, and I'll give you a demonstration of what's what. But we go up the stairs. So we all sit here and wait, and then there's going to be a little exhibition, which I'm not allowed to film, so yeah, we'll probably chop it at this point, and then we'll walk around. I think it'll be the icing on the cake for the Bath section.
So you can now take photographs in this room, portraits, timeline of Jane, and the £5 and £10 notes are over here. The £5 note, those of you that are interested, The Bank of England in 2017 decided to change the £5 notes to the plastic ones we know today. So to get people on board, they issued them all, but they issued 5 of them with Jane on, very minutely. 4 of them have been found, that being one of them, but one of them is still missing. And we think if you're lucky to find it, it's now worth £60,000. So if you have a £5 note with Elizabeth on, check it to make sure it's not the one with Jane on. Now Jane is popping her head out between the pound sign and Big Ben. You will need the magnifying glass to see it. So do have a look and then check your £5 notes. Next to it is the £10 note. Now the £10 note we think is worth £10,000 because of the number it is on and the building it's in. Also, the Bank of England at the time was run by Mark Carney, and the letter we've got there was signed by him, and of course he is now the Prime Minister of Canada. So we think it's now probably worth just over £10,000. It is very difficult to see, but she's popping her head out between the pound sign and
Yeah,
the
I
pen.
need to actually get my glasses out so I can see, even with the magnifying glass.
Amazing.
Right, I'm going to have another look.
It's that kind of 3D hologram stuff, isn't it?
That's right, yeah, it is. And they've got a writing round it. It's a quotation from Persuasion.
Oh.
You kiss my soul, I'm half agony, half hope. But that is really, really small.
So there's still one of those out there in
Yeah.
circulation, unless somebody's kind of
Well,
nicked it up or something.
either somebody's gone back home from abroad, taken it with them,
Yeah.
because we all do it. I mean, I've
Yeah.
still got in my wallet New Zealand dollars when I went over there in 1992.
Okay.
Why do I keep them in the back now?
Just in case you go back.
Well, I said I'd come back, but I haven't gone back.
And you need some loose change, right?
No.
To Mrs. Elizabeth Darcy. Dear Madam, I have been instructed by the Finance Department at Pemberley to inform you that your allowance for hats and bonnets has been increased to £2 per annum. As you can see from this letter, the scratching still persists. This is supposed to be the truest likeness of Jane Austen, both in height and stature. You can leave it to your imagination and decision as to whether this is a true likeness. But based on the forensic and witness, police forensic artist and Pastoral Society member Melissa Drew was commissioned to produce a new portrait. And so from that, they produced this. Probably the truest likeness of Jane Austen. And that is it. That's all the footage. So let's just have a quick look at the visitor centre, the gift shop, see what they're offering here. We should open it on Lady Catherine and Mr. Collins. Who knew? So that concludes the Jane Austen Visitor Centre. I'm going to put some links for their social media sites, so it will be things like Facebook, Instagram, that kind of stuff. If you're ever in the area, it's worth a little visit. Right, that is all of Bath done. I now need to go down to the coast because Jane had a penchant for Lyme Regis. Isn't this amazing? It's like Ramsgate in Pride and Prejudice, but it's not. I'm actually in Lyme Regis. And you know that old thing about when in Rome, do as the Romans? How about when in Lyme Regis, do as Jane Austen? Now, she came here twice, 1803 and 1804, and practically fell in love with the place, is the best way I could describe it. She stayed in a lodging house, which is just up the top of the hill there, so we're going to have a look at that in a minute. But we've also got the Cobb, which is jutting out, so I have to take you there, because that featured in Persuasion, didn't it? And this is what I was saying when I was back at, where was I? Green Park, about how Jane would incorporate real life places so that her readers would recognise them in her books and in her novels. So she used the Cobb in Persuasion, didn't she? Louisa Musgrove taking a tumble. Her precipitation, what's the quote? I'll put it on the screen here. So yeah, Lyme Regis, we need to have a... That's what I was going to say. I mean, I'm giving the game away before I even do everything. The fact that two of her brothers were in the Navy meant that when she came down here, she was familiar with it. So Lyme Regis itself would have been quite a naval port, because you got up the coast, past the Jurassic coast, you get to Southampton and Portsmouth. In terms of British naval times, very strategic and important. Get us out into the Spanish Armada and stuff, quite apart from Plymouth, which is that way. So Lyme Regis itself was a naval port, so when Jane came here, she would have, I want to say, felt at home. But because two of her brothers ranked really highly, one was a captain with Nelson, I believe, and one was an admiral. Admirable hay fever's getting me now. So yeah, let's go and have a look. Yeah, that's what I was saying. The fact that she felt at home here, and it would have influenced, and it certainly did influence her novels, didn't it? Persuasion comes to mind. Northanger Abbey, does that have like naval captains and things in it? As I said earlier, I'm really quite familiar with Pride and Prejudice. I know of her other novels, and I may have seen an adaptation or two once or twice, but I've never really delved into them like I have with Pride and Prejudice, so that's something I need to rectify. Anyway, let's go up here. Not so Jane Austen related, but it does give you an idea of the size of the little seafaring town. It's got a Jubilee pavilion. This is the beach where we did our guitars on the beach back in 2015, and that was a Guinness Book of Records attempt to have as many guitarists on the beach as possible. So yeah, I'm quite familiar with this place. Anyway, we want to go up these steps because it looks like you could expect Mrs. Young and Wickham to be standing on the corner here. Original crumbly fudge. So just walking up this cobblestone lane here, all these lovely quaint little shops. But somewhere just along here is the guest house where Jane stayed, and I do believe they have a plaque, so I hope we can find it. It could be this very one. Remember what I said about everybody wanting a slice of the action? So if they've got any connection to any literary giant, Payne House. This is the most likely lodging of Jane Austen, whose visits to Lyme in 1803 and 4 gave birth to her novel Persuasion. See, I told you. Persuasion, inspired by Lyme Regis, which can only mean one thing. We've got to go down to the Cobb, haven't we? So at least walk in the footsteps. Well, I don't know. You know, it's Kieran Hines, Amanda Root doing their thing. They're just actors, aren't they? So we're walking more in their footsteps than Jane's. Let's go back down here and we can walk along the seafront. I don't think I'll do too much footage other than when I get to the Cobb, because there's just a lot of people. Easter weekend, right? Which is what I'm thinking. Ooh, throngs of people. Can you imagine Jane coming down here? Obviously she would get her inspiration seeing all the naval ships and frigates, and she would be rubbing shoulders, wouldn't she, with all the naval sailors and the admirals and the captains and all of those things. 1803 and 1804. I'm trying to think where in her life as a published author. She hadn't even published at this point, had she? I really must clue up on that. I'm thinking, when was Sensibility, Pride and Sensibility, and Sense and Prejudice? First drafts, mind you. Okay, I'm waffling now. What I need to do is get to the Cobb, so we'll do that. Now, as I've shared many, many times in my videos about my acting, I've done quite a fair amount of background acting, and I know what it's like when you're on set and they've spent an absolute fortune to make it look real, quite apart from when I was on The Crown and, you know, you're supposed to be standing at the gates of Buckingham Palace and you've got a big huge green screen in front of you, and you get the main actor turns up in his car, goes through the gate, and then cut, and he gets out of the car, and it's all fabricated because you then see Buckingham Palace in the background on the screen. But when you get something like this, and BBC had to probably procure the whole Cobb and the harbour for however long it took them to shoot the 95 production of Persuasion, because all of these modern boats would be gone, wouldn't they? You'd have to close it off so that nobody could be seen. Now, if we go up here, I've got to climb up this bit. Oh. Yeah, You have to close it all off so that there's no public and remove all things like this. Because you wouldn't want modern stuff in the scene. There is a scene where they're throwing rocks, aren't they, into the sea. And that's filmed down there with the backdrop of the Cobb. So Amanda Root and the gang are all down there with the hills in the background. And then they walk on the Cobb. So in Persuasion, if I get my facts right, because again, as I said, I'm more into Pride and Prejudice and I've got to clue up on all these other ones, especially because you all want me to do character analysis, is the fact that sometime in the distant past, Anne Elliot has said no to Wentworth, so that she, I don't know, what was the reason, what was the mismatch. Nonetheless, he's back in her life. She's shocked that he's back in her life, and her emotions are in turmoil. And they're walking along here, and it's probably more that section over there. But it's the skill of Jane Austen to weave a story that tells us that the heroine is going through kind of the turmoil of seeing the person she clearly loved, regrets the fact that she let him go, and here he is walking along the Cobb with the party. It looks like Louisa Musgrove has got her eyes on Wentworth and she's flirting with him. This is from a recent viewing that I did, and they're all walking along here, aren't they? Look at that. Can you imagine the BBC production? They have to focus the camera this way so that they don't get any of this modernity in the shot. Anyway, I'm not going to take you to the end. I'm just going to point out the staircase that I suspect in the novel Jane Austen was thinking about, that Louisa Musgrove took a tumble from. And here it is. So let's go down it without taking a tumble, and we'll look at it from the top. Whoa, it's precarious, but I want to do it. I've just noticed my shoelaces just a tad undone. Not a good thing to be coming down these. Imagine if one of these broke as I stood on it. I would take a tumble. Dink, 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 dink. And we're on terra firma again. That was the scene, wasn't it? I'm not sure this white bollard was here. But there you go. She does it once. Catch me, Mr. Wentworth, Captain Wentworth. And does it again. She's on the floor. That's for all you Persuasion fans. That's the 1995 production staircase where she takes a fall. I think it is. I can't think it would be that modern one over there.
In a temple.
Thank you.
Just that one?
Yep.
6:30, please.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much.
I have been warned to be careful of the seagulls. Rum and raisin, because it's kind of like piratey, isn't it? Arr, a bottle of rum. So that was Somerset and Dorset, Bath and Lyme Regis. So we started this morning doing Hampshire, so it was Steventon and Chawton. We moved out to Bath and down to Lyme Regis. I think what we need to do is move along the coast now and have a look at a few more locations along this south coast, namely Southampton and Worthing. Oh, it's melting already. I'm going to enjoy my ice cream, and you're going to watch the screen pan across as we get ourselves into Southampton. And so I find myself in Southampton, and why not? Because Jane and her mother and her sister Cassandra moved here in 1807, and they resided in a house in Castle Square, which we'll have a look at in a minute. Unfortunately, the original building doesn't exist anymore, and it's been replaced by a pub, which is also closed down, and it's going to be converted into flats. The exact address isn't specifically known in historical records, but the location is within this known area as Castle Square, and I believe that they rented the house from the Marquis of Lansdowne, who apparently had a mock castle, and I think you can just see the mock castle in the background. I think I might just go and have a quick look. This certainly looks like a real castle. Whether this was a mock castle or not, I'm not sure. But it is interesting to note that Jane rented the house from the Marquis of Lansdowne, who has, there is a picture on the side of the pub. We're going to have a look at that now. But there are also a couple of other locations down here, so it'd be interesting to kind of walk in Jane's footsteps, knowing that she would have walked along here, perhaps either down below or along this wall promenade, and then eventually down to the harbour. Now, one thing I am fascinated with is the fact that Southampton holds a place in the Jane Austen history, and to that purpose they obviously have a society here, and they have a number of plaques around the city, so we'll take a look at them. So coming along the wall we get to see what's now the juniper berry. Now, as I said, the house no longer stands here, but we do have a plaque. City of Southampton, Jane Austen author, Jane Austen's house. Jane's home from 1807 to 1809 was sited here in Castle Square. The house was rented from the Marquis of Lansdowne, who lived opposite in his mock Gothic castle. The Austen's garden stretched back to the town walls, and that's the town walls there. So this site was actually the house and the garden, affording extensive views of the New Forest, and at the time the River Test at high tide reached the base walls. Now, Jane refers to various aspects of Southampton in her letters, including social events, the town scenery, and her personal experiences. It's all a little bit modern now, however there's a couple of old buildings here. She also wrote about taking walks on the city walls and enjoying boat trips on the River Itchen. And she also mentioned the town shops, local acquaintances, and other entertainments available at the time. The old courthouse, One Castle Lane. I want to just see if there's a date anywhere, because if there's a date anywhere, then we will know that this building was here. I was looking for a date, but apparently in 1897 nothing happened here. Classic. Right, we'll take a quick walk along the castle wall down to the seafront, because there are two more plaques. Here comes the bride. Doesn't she look lovely? An Austen wedding. I actually wanted to photograph the Duke of Wellington pub, which is an old, I think it's Tudor. Let's go and have a look. Congratulations. I wonder if they're getting the ferry to to Isle of Wight. The Duke of Wellington, 12th century stone house on this site, foundations and cellars of which still remain, was from 1220, owned by Benedict Ace. Pause to read, blah, blah, blah. The reason I was intrigued is that we've got a castle entrance there, where of course Jane walked the castle surrounds and enjoyed walking, you know, around the castle area. Busy Southampton. I'm wondering if she might have frequented the pub. It would have been an alehouse. And she was fond and partial of lively entertainment. It says so in her letters. And she would, I think there was one, I'll put it on the screen, where she kind of infers that she may have had one too many drinks while making merry. She was a girl, wasn't she, our Jane? I'm walking up here because it says there's an old Tudor house and it's a museum. Now, if this was from Elizabethan and Henry VIII's times, you know, the Tudors, then it would have existed when Jane was here. I don't know if I should go in, but would Jane have come in here? Tudor House and Gardens. Customer information. It is a museum. And I would suggest that, yes, you could go in if you were visiting Southampton, if you were following in Jane's footsteps, because the house goes around and connects to edge of the wall, and you've got the castle wall there. And Castle Square is just up there, and behind me, St. Michael's Church, where I believe Jane also worshipped when she stayed here with her brother Frank. Lovely old church. So yeah, the church is just down the road from Castle Square, which is just up there by the Juniper Berry pub. So the house was built on the corner there, and she would probably walk through here, if not on the walls, but certainly through here. She would have worshipped there, she would have visited the Tudor Museum, she might have gone to the Duke of York pub. I am, of course, making it all up, but it would be interesting to surmise that, you know, Jane was here and she walked in this general direction. Let's go down and look at this other plaque. We've got the Isle of Wight ferry here. We can come and get a ferry across the water. But just here, on the edge of the remains of the castle, which looks a bit amazing, is another plaque. Jane's niece, 14-year-old Fanny Knight, records in her diary of Tuesday the 15th of September 1807 that Jane and the rest of the family embarked from here to visit friends in Hythe for afternoon tea. Fanny writes, "Mama, to everyone's astonishment, was of the party and not at all sick." Now that is a long boat ride from Southampton to Hythe. Let's leave Southampton and visit Worthing, because there are some Worthing connections with Jane Austen. Let's do it. There's always something wonderful about the sea. Perhaps it's calming, or it might satisfy someone's wanderlust. I think it did for Jane. Towards the end of 1805, she was just 29. She wasn't even a published author, and she spent at least 2.5 months here with her mother, her sister Cassandra, and her close friend Martha Lloyd. Now, they lived at Stanford's cottage in Warwick Street, which I'll take us to in a minute. It's just round the corner. It's now a Pizza Hut. But it was a charming cottage that was named after its original owner. We'll have a look at that when we get round there. So she arrived on the 18th of September and was certainly still in town by the 4th of November, and may have actually stayed here until Christmas. And until recently, all that was known about Jane was that she won 17 shillings in a raffle on the 19th of September and went to church on the 22nd of September, almost certainly the parish church of St. Mary. Now, however, an important link has been established between Jane and Edward Ogle, who was Worthing's chief citizen at the time. Direct evidence that Jane Austen knew Ogle comes from a letter she wrote 8 years after to Cassandra that while staying in London, and clearly the two sisters had kept in contact with Ogle after becoming friendly with him here in Worthing. And the letter went, "Sweet Mr. Ogle, I dare say he sees all the panoramas for nothing. Has free admittance everywhere. He is so delightful. Now you need not see anybody else." Now Jane found inspiration for many of her scenes and characters in her final unfinished novel, Sanditon, while she stayed here in the town in 1805. And members of the Jane Austen Society contacted Worthing Borough Council calling for a street name to be named after the author. And I'm going to take you up there after this one. So for now, let's go and have a look where she stayed while she was here in Worthing. So this is Warwick Street, and Stanford Square is where Pizza Express was. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Pizza Express when Jane was here, because she wouldn't have had a penchant for Italian food, would she? That being said, there it is, the cottage where she would have stayed. Isn't it fascinating? It looks 1805-ish, doesn't it? Even the windows look like they've been kept as it would have looked. But there is a blue plaque. Let's go and read it. Let's get up close here. Jane Austen novelist stayed here at Stamford Cottage from the 18th of September 05 to the end of the year. Lovely. What a nice connection. So obviously we've got all these new buildings here, but it's nice to see Stanley House looking, as I walk away, quite resplendent in its 19th century appearance. At the roof. What room shall we guess that Jane stayed in? If it was a lodging house, it would have been a room on the left or a right, or it could have been a room up there. Jane Austen stayed here from September to the end of the year, so yeah, easily 3 months, 2 months. Now, I want to go up to the top of Worthing. There's something to show you before it gets dark. It's been a long day. I hope you've been sticking with me. Right, let's get you up to the top of the road there. Now, I told you that we had a whole raft of unconnected Jane Austen stuff is going to happen. I will focus and zoom, but that's called Shelley House, and it says Percy Bysshe Shelley, 1792 to 1822. 2 of his earliest works were printed here. The husband of Mary Shelley, right? Author of Frankenstein. Percy Bysshe Shelley, 2 of his earliest... Maybe I just need to do a video on visiting Worthing and find out all the historical things that I can find. I love stumbling on stuff like that. Anyway, I did want to take you to the top of the town. Let's do it now. Chawton Gate. There's the connection. One last thing then to do while we're in Worthing. This little housing estate here was built by a company called Barratt Homes. Now, Barratt Homes, for you American viewers, is a housing company. Think real estate. So they buy plots of land, they build houses, and then they sell the houses off. Now, members of the Jane Austen Society, knowing that there was a connection with Jane Austen with Worthing, they actually approached the council and said, could we have a street named after Jane Austen? So actually, what happened is, Barratt Homes built this estate, and they named 3 streets after some kind of connection to Jane Austen. So we've got Chawton Gate, because of course Jane Austen stayed in Chawton House, which is now known as Jane Austen House. But just down here we've also got Austen Gate. And I'm actually now walking on Sanditon Way. And then to top it all off, the block of flats at the back there is called Mansfield Court, as opposed to Mansfield Park, right? So Jane Austen obviously didn't come to this part of Worthing, but she has had acknowledgement. I think it's fantastic. I think it's really good that, the Jane Austen Society would get in touch with the council, and then Barratt Homes, who built this really fine estate, would, in tribute to Jane Austen, name 3 closes, 3 houses, 3 streets: Chawton Close, Sanditon Way, Austen Gate, and then name the block of flats Mansfield Court. Fantastic. Okay, so we've done Bath. We've done all the Hampshire sites. We are now in West Sussex, so I'm coming right across England. There's only one place left to do, and that's Kent. So just like Maria Lucas says to Charlotte, have you asked her, is she to come to Kent and visit us? We shall go to Kent and see the Jane Austen connections there. I hope you're still with me so far. Let's go see what we've got in Kent. Look at this. A pub called the Wat Tyler, which we know from the Peasants' Revolt, don't we? So where am I? I'm in Dartford, amongst these old Tudor-style buildings. Now, we know that Jane was a Hampshire lass. She was born there, educated there, had several homes, and ultimately passed away there. So why Kent? Well, actually Kent has a significant connection to Jane Austen, mostly through her brother, but she had her great uncle who lived in Sevenoaks, and so she would have visited Kent frequently. I was going to say on frequent occasions. So I've come here specifically to find one thing, and it's not the church, but isn't that magnificent? But if we walk up here on the high street, we used to have, it was demolished in 1981, the Bull and George, which was a coaching inn which served along the route from London to Kent. So Jane Austen actually stayed here at the Bull and George Inn. I'll overlay a picture here for you so that you can see what it looked like. Certainly not from the 1800s, but, you know, in the 60s, that kind of thing. Now, as you saw in London with all the blue plaques, there is this thing that someone will want to have some kind of connection with Jane Austen, so they will put up a blue plaque, and I don't mind that. I think that's quite interesting. So where we now have Boots, the pharmacy, that whole building was built in 1981 when they demolished the Bull and George. But there is a plaque, so let's go and have a look. And this is particularly important if you think about Chaucer and his Pilgrim's Progress, which is a story about, the pilgrims coming from London to go to Canterbury. I think it's a bit bawdy, to be quite honest. But this is, as Dartford's High Street, a direct route from the Pilgrim's Progress from London, travelling all the way to Canterbury that way. But let's have a look here at this plaque. Jane Austen, 1775 to 1817, noted novelist. Jane Austen stayed at the former inn on this site, the Bull and George, when travelling to visit her brother in Canterbury. So Dartford has a Jane Austen connection, which is it's like a 2-minute visit for me, but I wanted to include it. So now that we're in Kent, I'm going to visit Sevenoaks because her great uncle and godfather, Francis Austen II, lived there. And I'm also going to travel into Kent. I'm not going to do Canterbury. I think there is a connection in Canterbury where Jane visited, was it possibly Thomas Knight's wife? And they subsequently inherited Whitefriars in Canterbury. But Canterbury, Whitefriars is now just a shopping centre. So there'll be no connection with Jane there at all. So I'm not doing Canterbury, but I am going to go down to Godmersham and Goodnestone. So we'll start by visiting Sevenoaks. Let's go. So I now found myself in Sevenoaks, and it's a hustle-bustle place. But I'm specifically interested in this building here, the Red House. I'll give you some information on it in a minute, but let's go over and look at the plaque on the front. The Red House, built 1868, the home of Dr. Fuller, pharmacist, and later of Francis Austen, the uncle of Jane Austen. So the Sevenoaks Preservation Society plaque. Who was Francis Austen? And what's the significance of this house? Well, let me cross this busy road because traffic's crazy here. Come to Sevenoaks and visit Jane Austen sites, and then we'll have a quick discussion about Francis Austen and the Red House. In July 1788, at the age of 12 and a half, Jane Austen visited her great uncle Francis Austen, who was a prosperous lawyer and resided in the Red House. During this visit, Jane was introduced to other members of the Austen family, and it's believed that her uncle commissioned the artist Ozias Humphrey to paint the Rice portrait during this time, and I'll put that on the screen. Now, it was Jane Austen's great-uncle who paid for her father, George, to attend the nearby Tunbridge Grammar School and later St John's College in Oxford. So Jane's parents presumably thought that their daughters should meet their father's benefactor. It is so impressive, isn't it? I always want to go and knock on the door and ask, you know, I'm doing a video on Jane Austen. Can I have a look, see what's what? So yeah, at the age of 12 and a half, she came here, and she would have been introduced to all the gentry and all the people that Frances Austen would have rubbed shoulders with, and that included the Sackvilles, who owned an old park at the back of the house. There's an actual picture of kind of like an artwork or a stencil of the house with its garden. It had a magnificent garden in the back. Fabulous. I am going to Knoll House because I want to do some photography. However, I want to show you something quickly just down the way here. Just down here, this building used to be a pub. And there's another significant connection with Sevenoaks that I have in my video making. Because I did a video about the Beatles visiting here in 1967 when they filmed Strawberry Fields Forever and sections of Penny Lane. If you're interested in the Beatles, check out this video up here. I'll put a thing on the screen. However, what is now Leverett's used to be an antique shop. And it was in this window, in this shop, that John discovered the poster for Pablo Fanke's circus, which eventually became The Benefit of Mr. Kite.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampoline.
And you can actually see that in the poster. It's fabulous. So they've placed a copy of it. In the window. It's fabulous. Sevenoaks has connections with the Beatles and Jane Austen. And Tudor Smith, who sometimes takes his life in his own hands crossing these roads. So that was it, the Red House. Perhaps I should have come here at 6 a.m. when there was no traffic. I just recorded it. So moving further afield then, having done Dartford and now Sevenoaks, let's go down to the Weald of Kent, kind of where I live, because the next couple of locations are on my doorstep. Well, the doorstep of where I live. So let's go there. Behind me is Godmersham Estate, which was owned by Edward Knight. And Jane would have visited here. It's now private, so I can't access it. It's not like a National Trust place or anything like that. And because it's private, we've got a hedgerow going all the way round. You can't go into the grounds. So I'm at the end. So what's the history here? It does have a strong connection with Jane Austen's family. As I said, Edward Knight Austen, well, he inherited the estate from his father, adopted father, Thomas Knight II. So following his death in 1794, Edward inherited the estates, all of his estates, including Godmersham Park. Jane Austen herself was known to visit Godmersham Park. Now, she stayed here for extended periods, which provided her with inspiration for some of her novels. The estate is believed to have influenced her descriptions of grand country estates in most of her works. Think Pemberley. So the place holds a special place for Jane Austen's life and literary inspiration, primarily through her brother Edward. It's widely believed that the estate actually influenced Mansfield Park. There's no definitive proof, but there are several compelling connections. There's a very interesting plaque just here, which I think it might be worth just having a quick read. We can see it over the sun. Welcome to Godmersham Park. Now much reduced in size to approximately 900 acres, the estate and the village of Godmersham can be traced back to AD 824, when King Beowulf of Mercia granted the land of Godmersham to Archbishop Wolford. I think the important thing here is, of course, how it's gone into the hands of Edward Knight. In 1798, Edward Austen, brother of the novelist Jane Austen, moved into the house with his wife Elizabeth, Lyme Regis, of Goodnestone. He had inherited Godmersham along with the Hampshire estates of Chawton upon the death of his third cousin and adoptive father, Thomas Edward Knight II. Jane Austen was a frequent visitor to Godmersham, often spending several weeks at a time with Edward, Elizabeth and their children, for whom she was a much-loved aunt. The core of the house remained little changed since then, and the gardens, too, would be familiar to Jane even now. Features such as the Lime Avenue, the Temple on the bank, Temple Cottage and the Wilderness are all to the original period. Looks splendorous, doesn't it? And a 1785 depiction of Godmersham Park. Can you imagine Jane walking around here? Now, Jane frequently wrote about her visits to Godmersham Park and the grandeur of the house and the lifestyle of the gentry in her letters to Cassandra. She often commented on the daily activities, the visitors and the social life at the estate. In a letter from 1808, she humorously described the estate as being filled with a great many children. Edward and Elizabeth had 11. Now, just down the lane is the parish church of St. Lawrence, where the Knight family would have worshipped, as well as Jane, when she visited. So Edward and Elizabeth Knight are both buried in St. Lawrence's church. So let's go and take a look. So yeah, the property is now owned by ABDO College. I've no idea what ADBO is. It sounds like OCD, doesn't it? But I do think it's connected to, ocular. So it's like a college for opticians and things like that. What I will do is put an overview of the estate, because I'm sure you can do Google and things like that. So on our way to the church, we've got this vast wall as a perimeter. And I believe the other side of the wall, it talks about Jane's fascination with the lime grove. Or I might be confusing that with Steventon, because there was a lime grove walk that they used to have. But look how the tall wall. You're going to stop any invaders coming in. I had thought in my head that I could put this telescopic tripod up to see what was inside the wall, but that's just too high. And I think there are several entrances along here that could lead out onto the lane. So Jane and the family, the Knights, coming to St. Lawrence Church to worship, they don't necessarily have to. They might have been in a modest equipage, who knows, coming out of the estate behind me, and then trundling up the lane here to the church. But equally, they may have just had a nice walk, because there are several entrances and exits just up here. Here's one of them. Nicely well maintained. I would imagine there's a lock. Shall we try it? Oh, it opens. See the back of the house. Probably tripped some alarm. I'm always one to try something, So coming to the end of the lane, and the end of the estate wall, got this another gate here. Again, I'm half tempted to open it, but I'll probably get into trouble, so I'm not going to do this one. But if they came out of here, they would have walked the whole length inside the property and arrived here at St. Lawrence Church for their Sunday worship. But before we go in there, I'm just going to nip across the grass here, because there is, I think they have the tomb of Edward Knight and his wife Elizabeth in here. And of course, anywhere you go that's related to Jane Austen, they'll say, and Jane Austen did this here, and Jane Austen did that here. But of course she would have worshipped here in the church when she visited the family at Godmersham. But here, the Godmersham Park Heritage Centre, they've got a little Jane Austen exhibition, or at least I think that it's Jane Austen, but it could well be other information about the park. So before we do the church, let's go in here and yeah, we'll see if there's anything in there interesting. But I'm hoping A, that it's open, and B, they might allow me to do some filming. Goodnestone Park. Who do you think that is? It's that our Jane. Look here, it was a World War I airfield as well. So I'm going to go in and hopefully we get permission to film. If not, I'll just tell you about it. I am permitted to film, so it's great. So I'm just going to have a little walk around the room. It's got some fascinating costumes, and there's some kind of literary things. There's a direct descendant of Jane Austen here. So I'll have a walk around the room and film it, and then I'll just give you a voiceover. And then we'll go out and have a look at the church. Georgian cricket team. This is interesting. Look, Francis Austen, direct descendant of Jane's brother Francis, is a regular visitor. Edward Austen-Knight, there we are, Jane's brother, son of Reverend George Austen, rector of Steventon, and Cassandra Lee, brother of Jane Austen, adopted by Knight Jr., as we know. Elizabeth Bridges, so that was Edward's wife, and they lived at Goodnestone Park. Fanny Knight, Edward's eldest daughter. I think Fanny was, I think, one of Jane's favourite nieces. Completely fascinating. I love the connection to Jane Austen, obviously through Edward Knight. There's not a lot in here. It's obviously not just Jane Austen, is it? But every bump, every stone in the village has a history. And this is connected. Okay, let's go and have a look at the church. And it's nice just being in the, I want to say in the presence of, but it's not quite in the presence of, is it? But here once walked Jane Austen. Let's go and have a look at the church. It was a bit of a shame. I'd hoped that she would be in the room with me and talk me through some of the things and the connections, that kind of stuff. But just as I arrived, one of her friends arrived. They decided to have a cup of coffee instead. Anyway, we'll go and have a look at the church because it's obviously connected to the Knight family. So here we've got Jane Austen worshipped here. So she would obviously have come here when she was visiting.
She was visiting Edward.
Okay.
And when she visited Edward, she would walk through probably that door.
Yeah, because that's all inside the grounds of the park, isn't it?
Yes. They might go that way and come down. They would certainly go in through that blocked up entrance.
Oh, would that have been the main entrance into the church? Okay. So do you know where Edward Knight's gravestone is? Is it in here or is it inside?
Do you know, I haven't actually researched it, but
I might just have
I can show you his plaque. You've seen his plaque?
Yeah, I came here the other week, but I want to, obviously I didn't do any filming then, so I want to do it now, but...
Right. Susanna Sackey's
I'm being guided by a very pleasant lady who obviously has connections here to the church, so I'm capturing what I can on film.
Sorry, looking alongside.
Oh, so it's being revamped or whatever.
Yes, it's being rewritten, and the wording is actually done in calligraphy inside the church. But
is this what it's actually going to say then, or is that
no? It's going to say exactly what is inside the church.
Okay, so I'll go and have a look at that in a minute then. Susanna Sackey then, the nurse who brought up the children of Jane Austen's brother, is mounted inside the church.
Well, that's probably as much as you want.
Yeah.
But, and I'll show you where the Austen pews were.
Oh, yes, okay. So when they came to worship here, they would have actually had their own dedicated location in the church.
They had, the Knight family had their own little chapel with seating above the level of the church.
Oh.
And in those days, I think the level of all of it was lower. But this was all added by the Victorians, thanks to Edward Knight Austen.
Okay.
I mean, he did all the Butterfield renovations with the rood screen.
He was a major benefactor for the little community, wasn't he?
Yes, and he instigated it, and he was, as you say, a major benefactor. This is Susanna Sackey's wording.
Ah, okay. And that's what they're going to do on the main...
what will be written on the new stone.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Right underneath Edward's.
So that's
monument.
like
That's Edward's monument.
That's fascinating. Now I can point that there. They had issue of 11 children, of whom the 9 surviving have caused this monument to be erected to the memory of their beloved parents. In the family vault beneath are deposited the remains. So is this the family vault exactly here, or does it refer to somewhere within the church, do you think?
No, it refers to outside the church.
Oh, okay.
Where we saw the plaque on the wall.
Ah, okay.
Near there.
Okay.
But the original Austen-Knight pews were, this was the end wall of the church.
Okay.
And there was an entrance outside to these 2 covered separate chapels, as it were,
Okay.
with seating above,
Oh.
and they could sort of sit up there and see the rest of the people in church and see what was going on in the pulpit.
And of course they've got a good view of the pulpit,
Yes.
haven't they? Yes. So straight across there. Wow.
Very good times in the 21.
That sounds very Latin.
It is. It's Canterbury Archaeology Society.
Oh, okay.
And a chap called Tim Tatton Brown is really the expert on this church and wrote a piece about it.
And I saw one last monument on the wall there. So that's a dedication to Edward Knight. But this one here says Thomas.
Again, he called himself Knight. He was really born Thomas May, but to inherit the Knight land, he took the name Knight.
Okay.
And the broken pillar is symbolic of the broken bloodline.
So he was Edward Knight's adopted father then, wasn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Edward, and he also was adopted by the real Knight.
Oh, okay. Fascinating.
So he started off
in compliance with the
May.
will of Sir Thomas May. Yeah, okay.
There's a sort of potted history in him.
That is fascinating. I knew that that Edward Knight was adopted by Thomas, but I didn't realise that Thomas himself was an adopted child.
Yes, I mean, it's my friend.
Okay.
He's waiting for me.
Thank you very much. It was fascinating. I don't know how much of that I can edit and put in, but I'm going to leave as much of that in as possible, simply because when you tap into someone's knowledge, she obviously works here, let it flow. Just allow the conversation to happen, you know. It says here, Jane Austen. Jane Austen was a regular visitor to Godmersham in the early years of the 19th century because of her brother Edward owned the park. He had been adopted, which we know. The mansion was built, blah, blah, blah. Thomas May. I am going to have to look that up, but I shall take that with me. So fascinating. Little bit of information there. We've got these two epitaphs, haven't we? One to Sir Thomas Knight, who was Edward's adopted father, and one to Edward and Elizabeth. And I thought that was rather fascinating about Susanna Sacre, faithful servant and friend for nearly 60 years. Now I have actually done some reading of Jane Austen's letters, and I think Fanny Knight factors a lot in the letters, as does Susanna Sacre. I think that's for another video though. Maybe the letters of Jane Austen could be good. Right, I'm going to go over to Goodnestone, and I think it's about time to conclude the video. Yeah, just great stuff. Let's go over to Goodnestone and have a look at where Sir Brooke Bridges lived and where Elizabeth, his daughter, called family home, where Edward Knight would then marry into that family. And so finally, we are at Goodnestone Park, which is, as the crow flies, a mere 4 miles from where I live. Jane Austen was in the same vicinity as where I live. It blows the mind, to be quite honest. But what do you think of that lovely Georgian manor house? Isn't that spectacular? This property was owned by Sir Brooke Bridges II, who was the father of Elizabeth Brooks, and subsequently the wife of Jane's brother, Edward Austen Knight, or Edward Knight Austen. I think I'll just call him Edward Knight, shall I? But yeah, it's believed that when Edward married Elizabeth in 1791, Jane made her first trip here, and because Sir Brooke Bridges lived here with his wife, there's a house down the lane. It's separated only by a lane, I might add, Rowling House, which I will visit shortly. Now, there's a spectacular garden here, and I don't know if it's open, but I'm going to see if it is. But if it is open, I'll take you in, because it would be fascinating to have a look and see where Jane herself would have taken a turn around the garden. It's really, really lovely. The house is private. It's not a National Trust place or anything like that, so you can't go in. I did contact them. I did say, send them an email. Could I go in, please? No response whatsoever. That's the way of the world, isn't it? I do love it. I love how it's situated around these gardens and this park. And actually there is a walkway that goes around the whole estate called the Serpentine Walk. And you can actually walk the whole perimeter. So yeah, if we can get into the garden, if it's open, we're going to take a look. I'll just give you a little sort of preamble. Then we'll go over to Rowlings, which is separated only by a lane. Imagine that, Lizzie. Goodnestone Park Gardens, please pay garden admission using honesty box in the notice board. Gardens are open 10 till 4. Last admission 3. So we can actually go in, which is great. This is the honesty box. And normally you will come in there, postcards and pamphlets. Maybe we won't do the whole garden, but at least I can just come in here and have a look a bit of the house. Yeah, I am going to go in. You can't go into the main house. And I don't really know why I'm walking up here. Because although Sir Brooke Bridges owned it, and it was the family home of his daughter Elizabeth, who Edward Knight would have married, it's only that Jane would have visited here and attended balls, that kind of stuff. And in fact, she wrote in some of her letters about frequent visits here and then walking back up the lane. I say walking up the lane, maybe they went up through with carriages. But in her letters she talks about going back to Rowlings after being here at Goodnestone Park. Can you imagine Jane walking up the stairs and going into the garden for a walk? Yeah, it looks rather splendorous. I feel cheeky because it says house guests only beyond this point. Now, when I first visited here, I did inquire about going in the house, and I was told, no, it's private, you can't go in, it's rented out. And when they do things like the Open, the golf tournament, which is held at Sandwich, you get the famous golfers staying here. So, and I guess also pop stars and the like would come here if they've got local gigs. Comes into the garden. I could imagine Jane walking in this garden. It's very well maintained. And you have the church at the end, where I guess she would have worshipped as well, not just at Godmersham, although Edward would have lived at Godmersham and that was their whole estate. But before his adoptive father died and he inherited the estate, he lived at Rowlings, just up the road, which I mentioned earlier. So while Elizabeth visited at Rowlings, she would have attended worship at the church. So I think what I'm going to do is go up the lane which separates the manor from Rowlings. I've been playing with that in my head. Separated only by a lane. Imagine that, Lizzie. I think I might have to visit this place on my Tudor Travels channel, just so that I can do a full exploration, because it is rather quaint and lovely. Yeah, let's go over to Rowlings and see what we can see there. So coming out from the church, just along the main road, that is the lane that Jane would have taken to walk up through the woods to go to Rowlings. Might as well give you the drive cam. Because if she was going on horseback, she would have come down this way. Rowlings is actually just up the hill up there. So let's speed this up and get us to the church on time. No, not the church, Rowlings. So the Rowling House is just in the trees at the back there. So I've got to find myself a convenient place to stop because it is private and I won't be able to go in. But I might have to just abandon the car here and walk up the lane. Car cam. Let's have a look over the hedge. That's the only view I can afford of Rowling's rather splendourous house, and that's where Edward and Elizabeth stayed. So of course when Jane visited, she was visiting there. I think she came with Cassandra as well, actually. You can imagine the country walk that Jane would have done, probably straight across as the crow flies, because the country lane takes us back down there towards Goodnestone, behind the trees where we came from. Now the fascinating aspect of Rowlings is kind of like the thing that ties it all together in terms of what I was saying, that I've still got Pride and Prejudice on my brain. Jane is thought to have started her writings of first impressions while she was here at Rowlings and also at Goodnestone Park. So of course Goodnestone Park would have given her, even though Godmersham was more frequently visited once Edward inherited it, while she was here at Goodnestone, she got the whole premise of the Darcys and the Bingleys and all of that kind of stuff. To the point that you take the W away from Rowling, or Rowling House, and you get Rosings House, Rosings Park, Rowling House. So it must have given us some inspiration for Pride and Prejudice. It's a lovely, lovely house. Just can't go in, it's private. So no trip to any walking in Jane Austen's footsteps would be complete without visiting Jane Austen's house or Chawton Cottage. Now Jane lived here, and this is where she was most prolific as a writer. So she revised Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, had them both published. She then wrote Emma and Mansfield Park, both written here and published. We've got several things up here which I'll show you. Oh, it was 1809. Did I say 1805? So obviously you have to book. And have I booked? No, I haven't. I'm just turning up to see if it's possible to go in. 14 visitors entering the house every 20 minutes to ensure all our visitors have the best possible experience. Fully booked. There are 1320 slots. It's now 13:30. So there's nothing more I can say other than, shall I see if I can get a ticket and walk around with my GoPro, put some music on. Let's find out. Yay, it's good news. I got my ticket. The bad news, 2 o'clock, because that's the only slot. But she said there's a tea room opposite. Why don't you go and get yourself a cup of tea and come back at 2 o'clock? So we will get in and I will do some footage, so it should be good. It's 2 o'clock. Let's go in the house. Just leaving the camera rolling.
She went on to rewrite First Impressions, which she published as Pride and Prejudice. She also redrafted Susan, although she decided not to publish it. After her death, it was published as Northanger Abbey. Between 1811 and 1817, Jane wrote 3 new novels, Mansfield Park, Emma, and Persuasion, all of which were published from this house, although Persuasion, like Northanger Abbey, wasn't published until after her death. In the spring of 1817, Jane began working on a new novel known as The Brothers, but she did not live to complete it. Later, It was published as Sanditon. In May 1817, after a period of ill health, Jane left the village, accompanied by her sister Cassandra, to seek medical treatment at the county hospital in Winchester. She died 2 months later, on 18th of July, 1817, and was buried in Winchester Cathedral. After Jane's death, her mother and sister Cassandra continued to live here.
That's her dad's writing desk.
Okay.
2 chairs there. Get what made there now. And a little writing table in the next room. So all the other furniture is of the period.
Yes.
But not.
But that was, and her writing desk, yeah.
Shelves in the closet. Happy thought indeed.
going to Gretna Green, and if you cannot guess with whom, I shall think you a simpleton, for there is but one man in the world I love. What a good joke it will be. I can scarcely write for laughing.
So there you go, I'll leave you with a lasting impression, not the first impressions, washing on the line outside Chawton Cottage. Jane flourished here in her writing, but then ultimately succumbed to lymphoma, is that what I read? Or Hodgkin's disease. Lymphoma, I think I read, was cancerous, so maybe she caught cancer. I want it to be a jovial video, you know, full of all the love and the excitement and everything like that, but I don't think Jane's life mirrored her novels. Maybe that's why she could make the novels so good, with their angsty parts in them, if that makes sense. So cool, let's move on. We now arrive at number 8 College Street here in Winchester, and probably the most sombre part of the trip. In this house, Jane Austen lived her last days and died 18th of July, 1817. So it's early 1817, Jane's health begins to deteriorate, and she left Chawton in the May to seek treatment here in Winchester, staying with Cassandra in this rented house, number 8 College Street, which was near the hospital. Now, her symptoms included fatigue, back pain and skin discoloration. Possible causes they've suggested could be Addison's disease or Hodgkin's lymphoma. I heard yesterday in the Austin Centre that it was possibly cancer. Now, despite her illness, she continued writing nearly to the end, and she was working on Sanditon, which of course remained unfinished. However, even in her final weeks, Jane Austen was creating, sketching new characters, teasing her sister with her sharp observations, and never really lost her wit. Now, it is said that when her funeral procession came along here at College Street, Cassandra watched from the top window. That's what I picked up on at the Jane Austen Centre. The guy was telling us that that's what happened, which I find odd, because I would have thought Cassandra would have walked with the funeral procession, but he was saying that she was up there. Jane died in Cassandra's arms. Isn't that tragic? So what we'll do, we'll go round the corner into Winchester Cathedral and just conclude the whole experience. So coming down through College Street, the funeral procession would have carried on through here into the cathedral, and I would assume in those days they wouldn't have had the bollards here. But the cathedral is on the other side of the wall there. So coming out through there and then into here, into the courtyard. So Jane's body is interred in the actual cathedral, which you might think would be quite odd considering that she wasn't famous, you know, when you think of all the poet laureates and authors buried at Westminster. But Jane's novels up to that point where she died were all penned by a lady, so not using her real name. And it was only posthumously after she died that her brother Henry changed the previous novels, but also Persuasion and Northanger Abbey were the only two albums, I was going to say, sounds like a rock star, the only two books published under the name Jane Austen, which brought her to the public's attention, because suddenly all these novels that had been written by a lady were actually written by Jane Austen. So there is some importance. But she wasn't buried here because she was famous, as I just said, but likely through her brother Henry's clerical connections. Let's find the entrance, go inside. I'm guessing this way. 9 till 5, last entry 4 o'clock. Everyone welcome. So it looks like they're going to do a talk on Jane Austen in the cathedral here. Michael Wheeler and Gillian Dow. You can have Jane Austen tea and a tea tour. Lovely. Isn't this magnificent? Look at this. It's rather nice that she's actually buried in a cathedral. You know, we saw her father's grave at St. Swithin's Church, and we saw her brother's graves at St. Nicholas Church in Steventon, and yet she was not a celebrity when she passed away. She was just the lady or a lady. But because of her brother Henry's connections, she was able to be buried here. So first and foremost, here she lies. My word, Jane is under there. They've built this rather lovely memorial window. I'm not sure I can read the lettering, but I'll scan it down for you. And there you go, my walking in Jane Austen's footsteps. What a fantastic tour. I really got involved with that because it got me into the mood of knowing Jane Austen better, if that makes sense. So she lies inside Winchester Cathedral, but we've seen where she was born, where she grew up, all the places she went to, and all the things and the places and the people that inspired her to write those wonderful novels. Taken at the age of 41, a tragedy in many respects because she was not known for her novels till after her death, posthumously, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion bearing her name, but the others were just a lady. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you've enjoyed walking around, seeing all these locations, and it actually brings a little bit of Jane Austen to life. Does that make sense? It brings her more as almost a modern author. So wonderful. Drop me a comment, of course, and let me know how you, or what you thought of it. I was actually going to break this video down into numerous sections, and someone has suggested, yeah, do it in multiple sections. But the more I've thought about it, even if it's over an hour long, I'm just going to do it. If you can't watch it all in one go, or you haven't, I should have said this at the beginning, then at least when you stop watching and you revisit, it should jump back to the same place. I'll probably say that at the beginning, actually. So for now, thank you so much for watching. I'll get back to my last two Pride and Prejudice character analyses, which is Darcy and Elizabeth, and also the vote is swaying in the favour of Sense and Sensibility. It's very close between that and Persuasion, so I'm still working out which one to do first, because I think my own desire is going to be Persuasion first, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah, walking in Jane Austen's footsteps. She was a girl. We love her for her writing, for her steadfastness, for her resolution to stay true to herself. We can see now why she is a literary genius and considered high amongst all those other authors of our generations and other generations. Oh my God, I'm waffling now. I'm going to see you in the next video. Bye for now.